Thanks for supporting the film.
Oh, I mean, I love it. I obviously one thing that is so appealing about it is how relatable it is. For I can relate to it for many reasons, many aspects of my life, um, and especially being a father, being both in finding myself in embarrassing positions a lot, but also being an embarrassment to my sons. So I guess I'll start. No, since you wrote it, I guess I read that this sort of started percolating at your brother's wedding. So is that true? And what can you?
Yeah, I think around, I guess my parents were getting divorced around the same time that my brother was getting married. And so I think the intersection of there was like a certain absurdity to that happening and felt like they somehow had something to do with each other, even though they didn't. Um, and then I started writing my way through it, and what emerged was this character of Peter, who wants to be the father and take care of his family, but also is sort of being a baby and wants to be taken care of by his family, and so desperately wants his own parents to remain parents and alive and there for him in his time of need, but they're older and ailing. And so there was just a lot in the character of Peter that I could kind of grab onto, and then was lucky enough that Griffin agreed to take on the part.
And at what point? I'm sure you asked this a lot, but at what point did you envision it for Griffin? Because it's perfect casting. It feels like.
Yeah, I think it was around the time that he was doing his Joan Didion documentary and
Mm.
saw him in that, and just he was so perfect for Peter. I knew that it had to be somebody so kind of lovable, because Peter can be so frustrating, and you kind of still need to feel for him in those moments of regression and ridiculousness and absurdity. And I also knew that Griffin could make it very funny, even at his most absurd moments, that there would be a levity and humor to it, even in the kind of gallows humor towards the end. I knew that Griffin would sort of be able to knock that out of the park.
Yeah, somehow I guess you find yourself attached to roles dealing with characters who are in these embarrassing situations. Like the subject of embarrassment seems to come up in some of your movies. So Griffin, what appealed to you about the script?
When it's a very rare thing to be sent and offered a script in which a person of my age carries the movie, and also with all that, uh, with all of these situations that were, as you say, relatable, at play of being a father to adult children. I certainly know that one, and I know the loss of outliving your parents, and I certainly know divorce. And here you have all three of these life moments that are all intermingling with each other. And I love what it said about men, men at different stages of their lives, and grappling, and the big questions are never answered. We're all just works in progress, and but I always recognized humor in it, and I did like the foolish things, I would say, trying to connect with my gay son, as which is just his sexual preference is treated just incidentally, in an incidental way, in the movie, which I thought was very good. But also my attitude, which is still sort of new and antiquated, and I say really stupid things, trying to be Mr. Understanding Dad. I get the whole gay thing, I get it. And there's just some really funny things in it.
And what is it like getting a film like this made? In a way, one of the best things about it is almost a kind of modesty. It's just, I mean, it's about sort of something that we can all relate to, yet you don't see many movies
Yeah, I think it's a movie that's sort of about these relationships and all of the small moments that hopefully add
Yeah.
up to something bigger. And it's hard to make these kind of movies. There's not it's funny going and showing it around because the response is that there is this longing and appetite for it, but it's a moment where it's very hard to figure out where these movies live. We've been really lucky that for the last year and change, it's had a really wonderful festival life. And so that was sort of the first part of its life. And then luckily this distributor came along and not only wanted to put it in one or two theaters, but put it in a bunch of cities because his gamble was that people do want to see these kinds of movies again and they miss them and they miss adult dramas. And I'm sure we'll we'll find out if that's true or not soon. But I do think there is an appetite for this sort of thing, and people miss going to the theaters and seeing movies about um, kind of adult dramas. Getting it made was difficult, but I always knew it was going to be difficult. I think when I first started writing it, there was a moment where I knew I had this very commercial idea. I think I had been frustrated trying to make some other movies, and I thought this newly divorced man crashes his son's bachelor party. I think I can sell that to a studio. And then unfortunately, my own neuroses crept into the script and it became, it's like something that I would actually want to spend years of my life making, but no longer the studio movie.
He took a tentpole idea. I mean, we could have made billions. And just brought his own neurosis to it.
I was so happy it wasn't that kind of movie because
I
I
know.
sort of knew
It's
I
quite
knew
wonderful.
the synopsis and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be like really cheesy.
Yeah, so it kind of, I think, always had going for it that it had this a, a log line that was sort of could be easily pitched. But anyone who opened the script quickly realized that it was really this character driven movie about these relationships. And the premise of it coheres it, but it was always going to be about Griffin's character and his relationships with his sons and all of them trying to break out of the identities that have either been ascribed to them or that they're trying to cling on to. And yeah, I was really lucky to get Griffin on board and James Norton and Miles and Rosanna and all of these wonderful actors. I think one wanted to work with Griffin and I think also saw something in these characters that they've been, missing in the scripts they've been reading, and we're excited to sink their teeth into it.
Griffin, I'm curious about your perspective about this idea of what people want to see in theaters because you work, you had big success in television, and there is this feeling now that sort of television is the place where adult dramas are made and that theaters are for big like blockbuster films. That's kind of the common thinking these days.
Yeah, quite honestly, I kind of went into this kind of presuming that would be the case. But when we finished and started to show it in festivals, and we had a screening last night, early reviews have come in. I think because that way of thinking about independent movies or people talking movies, interrelationship movies that have just gone straight to streaming, I'm seeing now that over time people are starving for this, not just an appetite. It's being so warmly embraced and like, thank God this would happen. This is the kind of movie that people would flock to, in the 70s and 80s and line up around the Coronet Baronet on Third
Exactly.
Avenue, and that's the kind of movies I grew up on. That's what attracted me to this. I recognize this as a relative of the movies that I admired. And
Exactly. Yeah.
I think people are really like, oh, that's right. I forgot they make these movies too. And you can go and sit with other people and watch them and relate with a whole bunch of other people in a movie theater. Totally forgot that.
Right. And it's an experience that just always it's always a richer experience to see a film that way. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much I'm sure that we watch on TV that we're half watching, right?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. What was the shoot like? I mean, it was seemed very wise of you to film in a place where everybody would want to be on vacation.
Yeah, Tulum has changed a lot. I think
Yeah.
I don't know that any of us are hurrying back there after. Not, maybe we're jaded, but the beach was covered in sargassum. It's kind of turned into like a Cancun party destination. So it's sort of perfect for a bachelor party. And it wasn't so bad being able to dip into the ocean every now and again. But the thing that really emerged from being on location, I think especially coming out of COVID, um, and we were finally on set again and meeting new people and working on this project, and feel like real relationships were formed. And I've traveled with the movie now with Griffin for a long time, and James and Miles are here in town doing some press with us. And I think being on location kind of becomes a summer camp effect where it's like you can't go home. You're not going home to your friends or your family. So you go out to dinner with each other and hang out on the weekends. And that, was hugely beneficial, I think, to the movie, because I think one of the most charming things about it, although I'm biased, but I think you feel that Griffin, James, and Miles have real affection for each other, and they're good actors. They could have probably brought that anyways, but there is this extra texture, I think, to really feeling that.
Yeah, I mean, the three of us hung out when we weren't working, and after on nights after we'd finished working, and there was a break in shooting for a couple of weeks, and we all took a vacation together and went to an island called 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, and we just wanted each other's company, which you don't get if you're shooting in New York or Los Angeles, which I've done a great deal. It's like you love everyone you're working with, but oh, there's the whistle. Good night. I'm going to see my family, and you go see yours, and I'll see you in the morning. We'll pretend we know each other.
Just as a last thing, because we don't have a lot of time left, but Griffin, I did want to ask, like, playing this character, just wondering if, I don't know, sort of if you could talk more about playing this character, Peter. Like, one thing that I found really moving about it was just you get to an age in life where you like really sort of accept who you are. You're not anguished about it, and you can, certainly have like flaws and have things you don't love about yourself, but you're like, there's a way that you're just sort of comfortable being who you are, which is like a big lesson that Peter gives to his sons, I think.
Um, there was so much, I could relate to, and it is about accepting, where you are in life, and I don't know that 5 years earlier I would have read this script and kind of understood what is going on in his brain. I didn't have to I didn't have to reach very far to think about my inner life. All I had to do was listen and respond, and in an honest way. And I in preparation, I probably should have researched what it is to be a dentist much more, but I'd been to had enough appointments to sort of fake that. But everything else, I just, all I wanted to do was in reading the script over and over would be just to see the arc from point A to point B, and it really wasn't very far, but it was. It was very important for me to kind of know where I was in the story, because like all movies, you shoot out of sequence. But it really, it just would just sort of touch me, these conversations of the bewilderment at what your children are going through, and kind of having your children see you sort of flailing in a broken relationship. These were things that came to me naturally, I think, of understanding.
Okay, well, I'll end with just sort of a dumb like fan question, but I had such so fun to see Richard Benjamin.
Oh,
Yeah.
how about that?
So
that.
how did you
That
get the
was-
idea of casting him? And then it was just I love him in so many movies and things.
Yeah, I think my casting director, 𝙀𝙬𝙀𝙀𝙀, who I adore and also I think shares a very similar sensibility to me and to Griffin. We were kind of going back and forth about who would be the dream person to play Griffin's dad. And I think Doug was the one who said, well, Richard Benjamin would obviously be the best, but I don't know if he would agree to do something like this if he'd come to New York. But we kind of were like, well, let's give it a week and see what he says. I think we were all sort of shocked when we heard back that he wanted to do a Zoom. He was up for it. And so Richard and I met on Zoom. I think I was already in Mexico City prepping. And it was crazy to be on Zoom in Mexico City prepping this movie, talking to Richard Benjamin and where else but Beverly Hills. And it was talking about, I think he just understood Simon and how he wanted to play Simon, and that it wasn't mocking him. It wasn't jokey, that he really believed that he had this one more shot at happiness, and that he really believed that what he was doing was in some ways brave. Then, one of the highlights of my, of not just making this movie, but of my life, is getting to listen to Griffin and Richard talk about making movies and Hollywood and New York, and, getting to hear Richard's stories was just, I think for Griffin and I both kind of like a pinch me.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, as an early teen. I remember distinctly the first time seeing Richard Benjamin. And it was around the same time I also saw Dustin Hoffman. And and those two things somehow put this in my brain of like, wow, if I think I want to be an actor. I mean, if they can do that and they have that kind of sensibility and that kind of, that kind of look and that thing, I felt familiar with it. And so I know his work in Paul Apprentice, of course, and so it was a delight to talk to him and also remind him. He directed a film called My Favorite Year, and I remember which I had auditioned for, and I remember my agent telling me, Griffin, it's not going to work out, but you were the second person in line. If it didn't work out with the first, it was going to be yours. And I wanted this movie. Every director remembers the one that got away, or every actor. And so I've always known I was the second choice for My Favorite Year. So here I am. I haven't seen Richard since that audition that I was so good in. And I reminded him, I said, Rich, if you remember, I was, he had no memory at all of it.
Well, you really held on to that.
And I realized my agent just made that up.
No, I'm sure it was.
I were in second.
A good agent.
And I was fourth. I don't know.
I'm sure you were second. Thank you so much. And
you,
congratulations again on the film.